Hi everyone, it's me, Ryan Tracy. Feeling compelled again to send out a letter to the Romans. A missive to my fellow white Christians about what is going on in this country and in response to the presidential debate last night between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. There's going to be a little traffic because I live on a trafficy road. And the video is going to be long because I am taking a long time to say everything because it's very early in the morning. But I have coffee and an internet connection, so I can't complain. Anyhow, let's just say I'm slightly disturbed, and that is understatement, by the president's endorsement of a white supremacist group. And not just endorsement, but an apparent gesture where he seemed to act as their commander, giving them orders to stand by and stand down. Never in the history of my lifetime have I seen something that terror-inducing. Although, just kidding. I mean, we live in America. There's lots of terror-inducing politics that try to, keep the population divided and hating each other, and that wants to send a message to specific groups, typically racial minorities and sexual minorities, that their lives are on the ballot this year. Again, I mean, this happens every year in every election in America. But never in my lifetime have I seen a president of the United States, even like the really worst ones. And don't forget, George W. Bush was bad. Basically imply that he has the power and authority to speak directly to what is effectively a paramilitary armed white supremacist group, who has now retweeted, or not Twitter because they're banned on Twitter because they're a hate group, that they're ready for his call to take up arms against whoever he asked them to take up arms against. This could take the direction of showing up at polls armed to intimidate and scare people away from voting. This could take the form of taking up arms against democratically elected Democratic leaders. I might take a couple tangents here because it's early and I'm improvising this. So for some context, I live in upstate New York. I was living in the city. I've been displaced by the pandemic. I don't even know how to tell you how many times I've seen a truck or a house with a Trump flag and a Confederate flag on it in upstate New York. This is not a new phenomenon. I think 8 years ago was the first time I saw a Confederate flag up here on someone's truck, some dude's truck in New York. I kind of say this to let everyone know that white supremacist groups aren't contained to red states, right? So this is going to be like a loose network of people connected because of the internet and technology. I mean, this is, before the internet, white supremacist groups found ways to find each other. But the the president is basically authorizing these people to take up arms at his beck and call. So, for instance, I think what I'm anticipating is something like Trump, who has drum beating against blue states and Democratic governors, could give this group the orders to place the governor of New York under house arrest. And this group has said they're waiting for his orders. They're standing down and standing by. So they could, Donald Trump could give orders to this group and other groups who are affiliated and allied with this group, and I'm not going to name the group because I don't want to take over public schools in Democratic states, in Democratic counties, because this will be politically motivated, right? They won't be mobilized against communities and places who support Donald Trump. So this will be a terror method to create a sort of a state of undemocracy, and specifically democratic strongholds, or however you want to say that. At the most extreme, this kind of dynamic where you have a democratically elected president who doesn't believe in the outcome of his own election, remember, authorizing civil violence sort of outside of state institutions, right? So he's not even commanding the police, because he isn't the commander of police. He is commander of the military, but I think there are still some limits he's respecting there, with the exception of sending in federal forces to recent protest areas and just having federal agents arrest protesters. That feels new to me. And also a perfect example of tyranny, according to the American Declaration of Independence, right? Sending in forces into a sovereign state without that state's approval. That would be a classical example of tyranny, according to our own foundational documents. So at its most extreme, this would be and I'm going to sort of make this video a little bit about myself, because I'm a gay person, a homosexual floating out there. White supremacist groups, here I am. Look, you found me. Although I don't really hide it on the internet, so you haven't discovered anything. Anyhow, this could, worst case scenario, this could be something like, no, I won't make it about me. Yeah, I mean, as a gay person, I definitely fear, and I'm having nightmarish fantasies that Donald Trump would authorize these kinds of groups to literally take over the homes and to take away the property of non-American people, of queer people, of immigrants. It's probably where it would go first, but who knows? It could be uneven and dispersed. Oh, white supremacist group in upstate New York. Who do you want to fuck up, or who do you want to, who do you hate and want to kill and want to eradicate from your communities? It could be very uneven. It could take the form of having these groups police specifically Black communities, and immigrant communities, and basically the idea, though, this is a very sort of Hitlerian thing to do, and that means Hitler, to authorize civil violence, which is he has and he is doing. He's done it since the beginning of his campaign for president, and in 2016. So none of this is a surprise, but this is getting really feels like tipping point-ish. If we don't, as still speaking to my white Christian brethren and sistren, and I can tell you in a whole video about why I'm using those words to identify myself, but now's really not the time. We are being asked by this president to support him and his quest for absolute power and authority, and as well as to, if we vote for him, to countersign or endorse his policy of violence. And it's policy at this point because it is how he intends to. It's how he has been ruling as the president/king he wants to be. And it's clearly he has just recently admitted that he does not at all recognize that his obligation to peacefully concede an election if he loses it. And he's got I almost said their name. He's got the the sad boys standing by, ready to help him out. So I think on my heart is I'm trying to reach a group of white Christian people in my own network who may listen to me. If you're willing to listen to an apostate homosexual person who's fled the church and doesn't read the Bible every day. I guess I'm trying to reach that group and be like, look, search your heart and think about Jesus and what Jesus would do when asked by, let's say, some kind of king of a region in the middle. I don't want to call it the Middle East because it's a modern stupid term. I'm forgetting the words. I don't know. A king back in Bible times. Back around, the year 30 AD or whatever. Jesus is floating around feeling like the Messiah and wanting to spread a message of peace and love and also convert lots of people into following him. And then some king of the state he's living in, Judea or something like this. I don't know. This is terrible. I'm a bad scholar of Christianity right now. Is like, hey everyone, take up weapons and get ready to kill your neighbors. Take up weapons and get ready to prevent your neighbors from experiencing something like freedom and love and livelihood. Take up weapons against your neighbors. It's what this president is doing. Just a quick question for the Christians out there. What do you think Jesus would have done? Because I know this has been one of your big phrases, WWJD, what would Jesus do? And I want you to search your heart and soul and think, if Jesus was living in a time when a king asked him and his neighbors to take up arms against each other, what do you think Jesus what his response would have been? Sure, give me the nearest sword and I will go and kill my neighbors for this king, because that's what he wants. I literally am improvising this. I don't know what's coming out of my mouth, sort of, but that's kind of where this is going. I know in my heart, and not because Jesus would have done it, but I know in my heart it is wrong, morally wrong, what is happening right now, and the way this president has used the tools of democracy and is using the tools of democracy to destroy democracy. That's also nothing new, first of all. That's kind of what happens in modern democracies. It's happening now in America, but it's not the first time it's happened in the world. But what am I talking about? And that's the thing too. It's like, I kind of just want to say, so the president has undermined faith in our electoral system from the point of the election that he won. Right? So that's just been his thing. He's like, look, I'm preparing the way because, if I screw up, which he obviously has in numbers of ways, and the people don't like me, I'm going to make sure that their votes don't count. And that includes Trump supporters. Trump supporters, your vote doesn't count if he takes your votes away. Right? You get the king, dictator, dear leader, sir, that you want to follow, but you don't get any more say in what happens to you and your country. So I guess if you're listening to me, you're not going to change your mind, and you're a white Christian, and you're going to vote for Donald Trump. I would just kind of encourage you not to vote, because he has told you that your vote is going to be illegitimate, right? And that really the Supreme Court should decide. So my message to you is just don't vote, because your leader has told you that your vote doesn't matter. So if you do vote for him, there's at least two problems with that. One is you know that it's a sham election, so that's just a waste of time. Two, if you vote for him again, and I'm assuming most of you voted for him the first time, if you could vote, you are voting for someone who does not believe in your right to vote. So that is always confusing to me. And maybe you should reconsider that, right? It's really easy to vote for a dictator when their politics align with yours, or at least when he says that they do. But if that leader also doesn't believe that you should really have a right to vote, especially if you use it to contradict him, then you should probably rethink that choice. And I also kind of had this other thought, which is like, if, for my white Christians who are planning to vote for a white supremacist president, again, we as citizens of the modern world, living in a supposed democracy, right, which guarantees us certain rights, inalienable rights to vote. Obviously, the history of America has been filled with contradictions around suffrage. It's a pretty recent thing that the sovereignty has been passed to people this way. I mean, if you're a white supremacist Christian, you're fantasizing about, the Middle Ages as like a great time for white people. You're definitely fantasizing about a time in which the right to vote just didn't exist. So that's just kind of like a thing, right? If you're like, oh, Europe in the 16th, 15th century, there's no democracy there. There's just ruling by the sword, and I think that's certainly what white supremacist groups want to do. So that's just really funny to me. Second of all, again, this is to my white Christian sistren. I'm just going to call y'all sistren. We have been given this weird thing passed down through the revolutionary period where we have power in our vote. We do. It's powerful. It is a very powerful thing. And if you vote for the current president, you are wielding that power in a way that will end democracy, almost certainly, in the United States. So that's seems like not a very smart thing to do. And second of all, you're wielding power in an unchristian-like way, insofar as the president has admitted twice in 1 week, that he is a president who's willing to sow civil violence in this country and pit neighbor against neighbor. I think that's what I'm really feeling, is the unneighborliness of the president's politics and of the people who seem to support him. Every time I see a giant Trump flag, I feel a little terrified of my neighbors. And what's going on between the president right now and white supremacist groups validates those fears. My neighbors who have giant Trump signs and maybe Confederate flags inside their house that they're ashamed of, but a lot of people are not so ashamed of that right now. The president authorizing these groups and his supporters to use violence makes me terrified of my neighbors, and justifiably so. That's not just like I'm making up a fantasy, that's what is happening. And so that is, to me, in my experience of Christianity, of being raised as a Christian, that's really what I mean. And having certain values and feelings about people and about ethics and morals, I think like love thy neighbor, or whatever it is, sorry, trucks. Whatever part of Christianity is really trying to intervene in civil strife and disagreement. That to me seems to be one of Christianity's like best aspects. One of its most important interventions into the secular world, right? Is how can people live together peacefully as brothers and sisters? And I don't know the genderqueer term for brother, twister, brothers, sisters, and twisters, or just twisters. That sounds fun to me. I could have just made a big error, but that's fine. Or maybe I said something really good. So brothers, sisters, and twisters. Anyway, Jesus to me, when I think about how I was raised, and I can find those things that I really held on to as a kid, being raised in a very white supremacist area of Oregon, and you know who you are, Oregon. You know where, which parts of Oregon you are. In a almost all white, small, rural Christian community. One of the things I pulled out from that experience was a Christian gesture toward neighborliness. And it's obviously people are going to have disagreements, and there won't be an end to human conflict, but there's a difference between accepting that people are going to disagree about things and living in a political system that's sort of built on the demos, the different groups within society who are going to have conflicting interests. There's a difference between recognizing that we live in that kind of society and creating a political system that is supposed to enable a peaceful working out of those problems. That's the theory behind democracy. And willfully selecting leaders who are stoking civil discord, who are not acting as the president of all Americans, who is specifically acting as the leader of a small minority of heavily armed and ideologically violent groups. Like, when I put it that way, like, you don't hear who you're voting for. I can't believe I have to say this, but I know people in the small town I grew up in are just like getting off to the fantasy of this president finally taking over America and finally putting liberal people in their place, and finally having an end to all this malarkey about homosexuality and Black Lives Matter and women's right to reproduction, finally putting an end to all of that. And my message for you there is like the only way to finally put an end to all of that is through huge amounts of violence. And as Christian people, that's what you're supporting. And I don't know which Christian God you're praying to. Maybe the Old Testament God of vengeance. Maybe that version of the God is who you're really after. The God who wants us to be obedient and not question his rules, and also not question our own participation in that violence and in those rules, right? We have no agency and no right to use free thought to create a world that is, like, honestly a better, more loving and generous place to live in. Which, to me, that kind of was what Christianity was about. Or again, that's what I took from it. And just on a personal note, that's kind of what my research is kind of directed toward that, or directed by that. I know that I really get excited about anything that is attempting to bridge worlds, not homogenize them, but people who are writers in particular, who are really trying to create a discourse for an experience of embodiment that isn't supported by current discourse, institutions, texts, the way we talk about things, symbolic organization of the life world. Anyhow, so back to Neighbors. If you're a Christian, you're a white Christian out there, and you're supporting Trump, it just seems like literally the most anti-Christian thing you could possibly do, or the anti-neighborly thing, is to vote for someone who has authorized. And you might be like, I'm not part of that group. I'm not part of those groups. I believe in loving people, but I also believe that the current president his values align with mine the most. Okay, well, the parts of his values that don't align with yours are really violent, and you're supporting that, and you have to own that. You have to understand that, and you have to take that seriously. I hope I've made it clear that this is not a full-throated endorsement of Joe Biden. I have a very sort of leftist kind of socialist politics, and am deeply unhappy with having to vote for Joe Biden in this election. That this is people like me are always in this position almost every presidential election cycle, where the centrist Democrats kind of always push out the more socialist candidates, and frankly, the more inspiring candidates. I don't know why they keep doing it. I'm just like, wait, that person isn't inspiring. Why do you want us to vote for this person? And in a lot of ways, a vote for Joe Biden is like, yeah, sure. A vote for centrist Democrats who tend to also be way for capitalism and way for the policies that continue to create the socio and economic conditions of social discord. So that would be my, if you really want to know like where I stand, that would be my response to Biden and the Democratic Party, is that they can call out Trump's violence all they want, but they continue to support economic policies that create the conditions of this strife, which is massive poverty. And I'm just talking about within our borders. This is not even to say anything of the America's impact outside our borders, right? That's another video, and I'm happy to make that. But if you're wondering if I'm just like crazy, Biden's the answer. Right now he's he's like a life raft that I have to grab onto, because the alternative, and we've only got two in America, two-party system, the alternative is legitimately terrifying. As a queer person, and even if I wasn't, like, as a person who values my right to vote, that will almost certainly be taken away by a second. It's not even a second Trump presidency. It's like the Trump dictatorship, which is what he has admitted to wanting in so many words. And I don't need a direct quote on that, because he has completely cast doubt on every institution that makes a viable, functioning democracy. The press, or who are the enemy, quote unquote, the enemy of the people, right? Anyone who disagrees with him is fake news. Any media outlet that criticizes him is fake news. This is classic tyranny as well. Our our education is starting to come for the schools now, and that was kind of my thing. Like the minute Trump starts to come for universities, we that signed and sealed, we are heading toward like a right wing dictatorship. So that's another video. Sorry. The electoral process itself. Oh, that's all the problems with the ballots. Blah, 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 blah. I mean, this is like for 4 years he's been doing this. So, what was it saying? Someone has valued my right to vote. Oh, right, which will almost certainly be taken away. Yeah. This. So fine. I don't like Biden really at all, and I don't like his policies, or the policies of the Democratic Party, mainstream Democratic Party, centrist Democratic Party. But it's like, at least they kind of want me to have the right to vote, and kind of think that, racism is wrong, or white supremacy is wrong, and kind of think that gay people should be allowed to exist and own property and stuff. That's the life, Rob, that I have right now. And in part, it's your fault. And I'm sorry to turn that around on you, but people who have been supporting Trump have contributed, who probably also supported George W. Bush, have probably been contributing and supporting to the Republican Party for decades, which continually forces America to this point where it's so extreme and so to the right that my only option almost every presidential cycle is a centrist Democrat whose values conflict with mine in so many ways. So that's kind of my personal appeal to you, is to kind of blame you. And just let you know that if you don't like Biden, you're actually kind of the problem. Because for me, this is the only choice I have now, because there is no way I could reasonably be asked to vote for a president who authorizes white supremacist violence. Like, again, you don't hear it when I say that. How could I vote for that person? To vote for a president who's done nothing but make wealthier people more wealthy and create huge economic disparities that, yes, have already existed, but he's completely on board with that. I don't even need to get into the taxes nonsense. Who has literally imprisoned children in cages and separated families at our border, regardless of what you think about immigration. That is wrong. It's completely unnecessary. There is no evidence that separating children from parents at the border helps the situation or deters people from coming here, who are fleeing violence from their own countries. So, like, how can you ask me to vote for this person? And when I go to that point, then I'm like, oh, you actually don't care if I vote for this person. You don't even really want to convince me to vote for this person because you don't think that, I guess, my worldview or my belief system should be legitimized or cared about. You're picking a leader for whom I couldn't reasonably support because his policies direct violence toward me and my friends and communities that I care deeply about, and my fellow Americans, and eventually yourself. And this is kind of like my last point, and I've been wanting to sort of make some kind of comment about this for a while, but I think it's hard to kind of make this point because when you're talking about white supremacy and racism against people of color in this country, I think the emphasis sort of needs to be on protecting and preserving those lives and creating a political and social structure in which those lives are valued and supported, and in which the fact that, let's say, Black Lives Matter is then reinforced by the society in which Black people live in. That's kind of my take on that. But just sort of one thought that has been brewing, and sorry, this is kind of directly directed toward white supremacist groups, or anyone who just kind of happens to think that white people are the superior people on the planet. White supremacists have always been willing to kill other white people in the name of white supremacy. Right, so Charlottesville, the young white woman who was killed, right? The recent protests where a young armed white dude crossed state borders to shoot, they ended up killing, I think, 2 white protesters, right? I forget the city, I'm sorry, it's the morning. Right, if you want to go back to, Oklahoma City bombing, lots of people died in that, and that was perpetrated by white supremacists. The bombing of abortion clinics, white people are dying in those attacks. The murder of gay people in my hometown, Redding, California, by white supremacists. They were, as far as I remember, they were the 2 men who were murdered in their homes by white supremacists were white. And if you want to go back to Civil War times or pre-Civil War times, John Brown was this white dude who was against slavery and tried to help create an armed uprising among enslaved people at Harper's Ferry, and was executed and murdered because of his attempt, executed by white people in the white state. So white supremacists who think that white people are the best people but are willing to kill other white people in order to make that state a reality, it just seems a bit illogical and dumb. You're sort of contradicting your belief that white people are superior when they're willing to kill each other in order to prove how superior they are. So this is like a minor point that is just kind of coming out at the end of this video. But I think what I connect it to is if you're white and you're voting for this white president because he makes you feel safe, and makes you feel that his armed militia groups are going to protect you and your property, the minute you disagree with him, the minute you find that you're at odds with this president and with the groups who support, the violent white supremacist groups who support him, you are at odds with them. And you are not immune from the violence that is sure to follow from a second Donald Trump presidency, and the wellspring of racialized white supremacists, anti-queer, anti-immigrant, anti-woman, anti-everyone who's not a white man of European descent, who's straight and rich, I guess. And poor people, poor white people, you're probably gonna get fucked by this too. Most of you will, because the economic structure won't change. But if you're voting for Donald Trump because he makes you feel safe because you're on his side, the minute you disagree and find yourself at odds with him, the violence you've authorized will turn on yourself. And that's kind of my last appeal to good white Christians who think they're doing God's will by voting for Donald Trump. The reality is that, in my experience, it couldn't be further away from Jesus' message of love and kindness and neighborliness. Number one. Two, you are enabling a political system that will inevitably turn against you and not give you actually a right to vote, a voice in things. So you're kind of, the generous read, not even a generous read, but the generous interpretation is like, you're thinking very short term about this, and you're not thinking about long-term consequences of your actions and the way you're using a really rare and precious power, which is the right to vote. So, in case there's any lingering questions, I am opposed to white supremacy and white supremacist groups. I don't even need to be opposed to them in order to feel that my life is sort of somewhere on a target in a shooting range in these groups. Again, they're armed, so if you disagree with them, you are disagreeing with a heavily armed and easily incited violent group. So I oppose white supremacy and groups that stand in the name of white supremacy. I support the phrase Black Lives Matter and the movement for Black Lives and the movement of anyone protesting for Black lives. Black and brown lives, I mean, I am on, if I have to be on a side, that's the side that I'm on. So I unequivocally denounce white supremacy and white supremacist groups. It's so easy to do, and I don't know why our president can't do it, although I think I just did explain why. I wish this message could, I don't know, be more inspiring or something, but I am having trouble sleeping at night over these things, and if you're still watching this and you're my fellow white Christian twisters or twithrin, please do some deep, deep, deep soul searching before you cast your ballot, and maybe start thinking about envisioning a world on Earth in which we can live together peacefully as brothers and sisters and twisters, as people who were meant to live together. By God. I don't know who by whom or who wants us to live together, but that's my heart. That's what my heart tells me, is that we are on this earth to live together and not to reproduce discord and strife and hatred among each other. So that's kind of my thing. Now I'm repeating myself. I have squandered my precious morning time to deliver this message to you, so please don't make it in vain, and write me back. Direct message me if you really want to talk about this kind of stuff, because I don't think that the internet is really a great place for these kinds of conversations, which is why I'm putting a 45-minute video. It's 42 and a half. By the time I wrap up, it will probably be 45. But if you really are, you're in my world and you're a Christian and you want to vote for Donald Trump, I'm happy to have a conversation about that. But I hope I've laid out the case of why it would be unreasonable for you to expect me or someone like me to vote for him, and also why voting for him is kind of unchristian. So I hate to create more division or divisiveness there, but if you want to talk to me, just DM me. It just sounds dirty when you say it. DM me. Yeah, and I'm happy to FaceTime or something. And you could tell me why you could never possibly vote for Biden, and maybe I'll agree on some of those points, but the imbalance of the way they're different seems to me extremely imbalanced, and terrifying. So, well, enough of the terror. Hopefully, hearing someone talk just candidly and without defenses is a peaceful act in itself. And I'm trying to introduce that into the social mediated world. And that's what I've got for you. So 45 minutes. I think I'm going to post this one to Instagram and Facebook. So people who follow me on those in those worlds, just, send me a message and we can kiki together. Okay. Good morning. Have a great day. Think about how you can be kind to your neighbor today. With your vote. I love you, miss you, sending you all the good vibes. Talk soon. Bye.